welcome to SquishiVision, where I yesterday actually watched Fantastic Four: The First Steps, which is essentially the fourth attempt at a Fantastic Four franchise and the first one that's in-house. So inevitably, it proves to be the first good one. It's hard to not watch this, however, and not compare it to the previous two iterations because, no, I haven't seen the 1994 version. Perhaps I should. And as Marvel's first family, a lot rides on the characterization of their interaction between each other and individually as much as anything else. So we should probably go through each of the characters, but before I go do that, look, I don't get why and when. Well, no, sorry, I do get rather why we started to avoid retelling origin stories, and it makes a lot of sense for heroes that we understand why they do what they do. So Batman, Superman. But the two origin stories that most people are familiar with when it comes to Fantastic Four, at least in as far as film, potentially also if you watch the cartoons like I did, they're all distinctly different. Well, maybe not all so different. Maybe if anything, Fantastic is the most different out of them all. But essentially, if you've only just watched the 2005 film and the 2015 film, it's really weird how these come out in 10-year increments. They're different, not just in the how, but also very much in the why. And I can tell you without missing a beat why Batman or Spider-Man do what they do, but I have to think about why the Fantastic Four do what they do. Again, the why, not the how. And it is an interesting story to tell, because the Fantastic Four have a historical, unique, public-facing persona in their superheroism. Like, there is much public celebrities and figures as they are heroes in often a traditional setting where that's not the case. And yes, this film, somewhat cleverly, through the medium of in-universe talk show exposition, does have a space to tell new audience members how Fantastic Four got their powers. But other than, well, we have superheroes, time to do superheroisms, I don't know why. Like, I know the why of why Affleck's Batman and Holland's Spider-Man do what they do, both from the previous iterations of the characters in the film, but also from the visual storytelling within those films. But that isn't the case here. Like, I couldn't tell you why they decided to be the heroes, other than they seem to be the first people in the universe to have powers, and I guess it's their kind of moral obligation, but that's not like enough to get me on board with these characters. And maybe it was the rush introduction to them. I do think parts of the film suffer it, and it feels a lot like, I remember watching it and thinking this at the time, it does feel a lot like watching the satisfactory sequel to a film that has already established the characters. I feel like I'm watching a film and I've missed the film already. Maybe you could. Well, no, you couldn't. I was going to say maybe you could imagine the 2015 film as the predecessor to this, but actually no, because those had completely different origins. Okay, by the way, let's talk about the individual members of this family. Reed Richards, I think, suffers the least from the rushed introduction, and this is potentially a very strong. It's hard, because as much as we malign 2005 Fantastic Four film, it is somewhat in retrospect actually kind of a entertaining film. I had never had any issues with Fantastic Four. I hated Fantastic, but I never had any strong issues with the 2005 Fantastic Four films. And I think even people who did never really had any issues with the casting. So it's still a bar to pass. And anyway, less about those films. It's clear that this is Reed Richards who suffers from the burden and insecurity of talent versus expectations. And that's something I think can sympathise with. And Pascal plays it very well. Like, this isn't a Reed Richards who's full of bravado, and it's, you know, clear throughout the film. I think Pedro Pascal plays it once very well. You can tell that their anxiety is prevalent. And they do what they do because they genuinely feel like they have to. And like that's prevalent throughout the film, and I definitely enjoy watching that performance. Conversely, I think Ben Grimm suffers the most from the whole throwing us into these characters, expecting us to already know what the deal is. They have the least to do narratively or arc-wise in the film, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, as far as I'm aware, having watched cartoons and watched the earlier films, and being somewhat aware of the comic book kind of iteration of the characters, a lot of Ben Grimm's character relies on overcoming the trauma of being turned into a monster. Everyone else gets these cool powers, and Ben Grimm is kind of forced with looking monstrous. And it's a prominent storyline in the last two versions of this franchise, and so perhaps because of that, the film either skips it, or I think even potentially suggests that it never happened. To a point where Ben Grimm is very comfortable with their identity, very accepted, even celebrated. Like, they go into the street and people are like, yo, say your catchphrase, or lift a car up. And it's great, like, generally it's great, but there's nothing much then left for them to do. Like, we do see the character, people have praised this already, being an accomplished pilot, and you know, being part of family dynamic well, and being other, you know, I mean, they interact well with other characters, but then so does everyone else. Like, they're a good source of heart and comfort and reassurance to other characters. Like, I like how they have that warm presence, but, like, you know, to a degree, other characters kind of already, like, that's like the base. Like, that's, other characters are already doing that as well. There's nothing else special that they get. I think they're the least fleshed out an arc-driven character in the film. Again, conversely, Johnny Storm comes out very, very strong in this film. It's a nice modern twist. So, you know, historically, in previous iterations, Johnny Storm is this womanizer, and they kind of, instead of going for a more kind of like gross, less kind of attractive version of that, where they're just like picking up women left and right, it plays on that with this nice riff where they actually form a genuine. It's not. I don't know how I still don't know how one-sided or two-sided it is, and perhaps a lot of that kind of connection is actually guilt-tripping. But they use their read on people, and then being a people person, to kind of like be more charmful and heartfelt, and try to like appeal to Silver Surfer, which I think is a nice kind of like twist of like what we know the character to be. And I think actually for me, the strongest parts of the film, the way that pays off when they are able to kind of like reverse engineer the like language of the Silver Surfer, and then be like, you know, all these people who are leading Galactus to have families as well, and you know, I understand that you made a sacrifice, but that doesn't really justify the pain that you bring. Professor Kirby, Sue Storm, I think is portrayed well. I think, you know, Sue Storm is often kind of highlighted trope. Like, there's always a, you know, a lot of people when they talk about superheroes and poor female superhero representation, they cite early comic Sue Storm, where Sue Storm basically couldn't do anything except to be invisible, have no other kind of contributions, so I'm told. And obviously that's like, this isn't the first film to kind of like repair that, but certainly, you know, is still actively doing that in a way which is very kind of strong. Arguably, she has the most to do driving the plot because of her connection to Franklin's kind of involvement in the plot. But we also get to see like very early and more aggressive and assertive and dangerous side of the character. You know, the fact that in essence she has one of the strongest powers and she's not afraid to kind of use it, and that's definitely an element of this film. And like seeing her lead the Fuse Foundation is a good continuation of the character. Again, it feels somewhat like as a payoff to as a sequel payoff. Something we're already kind of like building up towards, but whatever. And the dynamic between her and Reed Richards, I think, worked well. It's like, I like how it both is a source of strength for both of the characters, but also conflict. Like, there is conflict in this film between the team, but it's like not cheap conflict. It's like actually built up, nuanced, somewhat realistic conflict, and I think that's a strong part of the kind of characterization that perhaps, I mean, the conflict in Fantastic was just like grating to go through. I don't know if there's much conflict really in Fantastic Four. There was like, I think the end of the 2005 film, the end of it, was like they all kind of fell out briefly, all on separate ways, and then kind of came back together again. I don't think that kind of exists in Rise of Silver Surfer. But certainly, like, there's like nothing here is like overblown. It's relatively nuanced. Nuance is not the word before. It's played appropriately. It's not like overblown. Setting this film in Earth 828 is an interesting one. I can understand why they did it, and I think it's the only real choice they had to do. Fantastic Four is such a classical hero team that it's kind of a weird one to introduce into a universe where superheroes already exist, are prominent. There's already like these groups. I don't know, maybe you could have done a different spin on it now that I think about it. Maybe, but I feel like a lot of their appeal relies on them being one of the earliest kind of like superhero teams. I feel like, and I feel like this is kind of the angle that Marvel Studios was going with, where we have to kind of give them their own space to be seen in the world. Certainly Galactus would also be a Avengers level threat, so it would also be very difficult to kind of introduce Galactus as an enemy for this Fantastic Four, and not justify why a whole bunch of the other superpowered people don't come and intervene. So I do think, especially the take they wanted to do these characters, introducing them into Earth 199999 would be a mistake. But also, I don't know, there's something off-putting about it. I think it's the same way that, a lot of people are theorizing that the MCU will introduce the X-Men in a similar way, with having them come from a different universe. And I was watching Nerdist's speculation about a future MCU video this morning, earlier today. I think I woke up this morning, and they were like suggesting that it would be actually they suggested something completely different. But a lot of people have been speculating that the X-Men were going to be introduced by moving over from a different universe. And I always felt really weird about that. Like, it's like, well, on one hand, it seems weird to introduce mutants this late on into this universe, especially when, even more so Fantastic Four, the mutants are like a natural part of, the whole point of them is they're natural, and they've always been around. Just that people are becoming more aware of them, but they've always been like this part of history. So it seems weird to introduce them and be like, well, we're here, we just never talk about them. Maybe not, again. Maybe I'm not coming up with solutions. But, I don't know. So maybe that's why I'm like, I always felt a bit off-putting. It's like there's always ways around it, but I can also see from like a studio perspective why you would want them to have their own space separate from the rest of the universe. On the other hand, it kind of like cheats the creative limitation. Like, you've set yourself this limitation of having this pre-existing world. Now every time you add a new piece to the puzzle, you've got to work out how it slots in, and just being like, oh well, they come from an alternate universe, kind of like means you don't have to address that. So it's, I don't know, I'm kind of giving two conflicting opinions here, but it's kind of like, I don't have a firm opinion, but like I have an opinion. I guess perhaps the other reason why they did it, and I can't hate this reasoning, is that I love the aesthetic of futuristic 60s era New York. And the film both embraces it in terms of its set design, but also visuals. I like how saturated parts of the film look. I love some of the in-universe clips we get that are shot like in 4:3, or have that kind of film grain on. Weirdly though, as the film progresses, this seems to drop off. Not necessarily the in-universe clips, I can understand them not appearing like later on in the film, but like it seems to have become less saturated and more like, I don't know. Like I'm not the person who usually likes to criticize CGI slop. I think CGI is fine to do well. I think, there's different standards of how well that can be, and not every film is going to have like Avatar level graphics. But like, I remember I was watching the Galactus fight, and being like, this feels so like this isn't even like as impressive as watching a Transformers film. And I think that's a bar you've got to pass nowadays with big CGI beings. And I wonder where, especially for a flagship franchise as Fantastic Four, why they couldn't put more in it. Again, I don't know. There could be various reasons, and I don't want to be too disrespectful of CGI artists, because as we all know, they're not unionized and are often underpaid and overworked. But I think that essentially, I think that there was this weird mix where the film was both saturated, some parts unsaturated, other parts like a lot of fire was saturated, but a lot of the characters are desaturated, and it's like the film could decide whether it wants to replicate the Saturday morning cartoon look or a grounded MCU look. And Superman, which came out early this month, managed to like have that saturated cartoon look throughout. So it was kind of like, well, why couldn't you do that here? Also, like Superman, it's a really fast-paced introduction to character. It's a promising one though, and I think seeing how it connects to the larger universe it's set in, much like Superman, will be a good test of this depiction of the characters. I mean, I don't think it quite hits the litmus test of is this a better Fantastic Four than either of the Incredible films. I don't think we've surpassed that bar yet, and I have to be thinking, is it cheating if we try to get Brad Bird to make a new Fantastic Four film? I would love to see a Brad Bird Fantastic Four film. I'm also kind of curious to see, I don't think much of Matt Shatner's attempt to directing this, and I would be really curious to see how John Watts' version would have turned out. Perhaps Matt Shatner. I feel like perhaps even John Watts would be a better version. I like what John Watts did with Batman films, but obviously he pieced out for very, very valid reasons. So those are my thoughts. I've got a bunch of trailers I want to react to. I want to react to the 2 Star Trek trailers that dropped at Lost Eyes. I'm going to go set that up. In the meantime, I will go step out of my house.